Philippine Sea. Two carrier strike groups, one American, one Chinese, operating in the same body of water simultaneously, which is not unprecedented but is sufficiently uncommon to generate the kind of attention that results in satellite repositioning, extended E-2D orbits, and the specific quiet focus that settles over tactical operations centers when the picture on the display is worth studying rather than merely logging. The USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76 Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 97,000 tons, an air wing of approximately 80 aircraft, a crew of 5,000 operating in a body of water the Reagan has transited many times and whose dimensions and currents the navigation team knows with the familiarity of a commute, is conducting routine flight operations approximately 240 miles east of the Philippine coastline. The operations are routine in the sense that carrier flight operations are always routine, structured, procedural, demanding, and conducted at a pace that a casual observer might mistake for urgency, but that an experienced naval aviator would recognize as the sustained professional tempo of people doing an extraordinarily complex job in a manner that has been refined over decades. 63 miles to the northwest, the CNS Shandong, CV-17 PLAN carrier operating the J-15 Flying Shark carrier base fighter in a configuration that represents the People's Liberation Army Navy's current best effort at carrier aviation, a program that has been progressing with the determined ambition of an organization that decided it needed aircraft carriers and has been working toward that goal with the systematic patience of a large government that takes its defense program seriously, is also conducting flight operations. The Shandong's flight operations are somewhat less routine than the Reagan's, in the sense that the planned carrier aviation program is still accumulating the kind of institutional knowledge that the U.S. Navy has been building since 1927. Carrier aviation is one of the most complex operational endeavors in military history. The procedures, the safety culture, the maintenance rhythms, the crew coordination patterns, these things are not learned from manuals. They accumulate through practice, through incident analysis, through the specific kind of institutional memory that only forms when an organization has been doing something for long enough that its veterans can teach its juniors not just what to do, but why each step of the procedure exists. The plan has been doing carrier aviation for approximately 12 years. The U.S. Navy has been doing it for nearly a century. This is not a criticism of the plan's carrier aviation program. It is doing what programs do when they are serious and resourced, improving, iteration by iteration, every deployment cycle. The Shandong's current air wing competency is meaningfully better than it was 2 years ago. 2 years from now, it will be better still. This is the trajectory of a program that is committed. It is, however, still 12 years against 97 years, and 97 years of carrier aviation is visible in specific ways that 63 miles of Philippine Sea make observable to the right sensors. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye assigned to the Reagan Strike Group had the Shandong Strike Group on radar track from the moment the Chinese formation entered the E-2D's coverage arc. The E-2D's AN/APY-9 radar, orbiting at 22,000 feet with a coverage radius that encompasses an enormous volume of the Philippine Sea, is indifferent to the political significance of what it is tracking. It tracks everything. The Shandong's carrier, its escorting Type 052D destroyers and Type 054A frigates, its supply vessel, and the J-15S and the aircraft recovery pattern over the Chinese flight deck were all on the E-2DS display simultaneously. The E-2D crew was taking notes. Here is the genuine tension in this story because it is subtler than a missile launch or a close approach, but no less real. A Chinese carrier strike group conducting flight operations 63 miles from a U.S. carrier strike group is not an immediate tactical threat. Both formations have air defense umbrellas that overlap at their edges, a geometry that both tactical operations centers are aware of and are monitoring. The Chinese formation is professional enough not to penetrate the Reagan's defensive perimeter. The Reagan is professional enough not to change its operations based on the Shandong's presence. Both sides understand the visual geography of two carrier groups operating in the same general area. It is significant, it is a message, and it is monitored. The message the Shandong's presence sends is, we are here. We are operating. We are capable of sustained carrier aviation in the Philippine Sea within visual range, at least sensor range, of the United States Navy's flagship Pacific asset. Whatever you are doing, we can watch you do it, and we can do something comparable nearby. This message is genuine in its ambition and partially accurate in its content. The Shandong is here. It is operating. It is conducting carrier aviation. What the E-2D is observing over the course of the morning is the specific ways in which __0__ requires qualification. The Reagan's flight deck at full operational tempo runs on a cycle that has been optimized over decades of night and day carrier operations in every sea state and weather condition the Pacific offers. The catapult cycle time, the interval between aircraft launches from a single catapult, is an operationally important metric because it determines how quickly the carrier can generate combat power from a standing start. The Reagan's catapult operators work to a tempo that is efficient in the way that only procedurally perfected expertise produces efficiency. Nothing hurried, nothing wasted, each action in its place in a sequence that has been repeated so many times that the operators are not thinking about the procedure. They are executing it. The Reagan operates 4 catapults, 4 simultaneous launch points, each running its own cycle, each crew working with the focused economy of motion that a decade of practice produces. The combined output is a sortie generation rate that is, by any operational measure, the standard against which other carrier programs assess their own progress. The E-2D was tracking the Shandong's flight deck operation simultaneously. The comparison was not flattering. The Shandong uses a ski jump ramp for aircraft launch rather than catapults, a design choice that has implications for the weight and configuration of aircraft that can be launched, the fuel and weapons load those aircraft can carry, and the operational flexibility available to the air wing commander. A ski jump launch is simpler mechanically and cheaper to install and maintain than a steam catapult system, let alone the electromagnetic launch system on the Ford-class carriers. It is also less capable in ways that are operationally significant. A J-15 launched from a ski jump carries less fuel and fewer weapons than the same aircraft would if launched from a catapult. This is not an opinion. It is physics. The catapult does the energy work that the ski jump leaves to the aircraft's own engines, and engines have limits that catapults do not share. The combat radius of a J-15 from a ski jump launch is meaningfully shorter than from a catapult launch. The weapon's payload per sortie is meaningfully lighter. These differences accumulate across an air wing's operations in ways that are strategically significant at the scenario level. The E-2D's radar picture showed J-15SS departing the Shandong's deck at intervals, and in configurations that the radar track data and the signals intelligence from the RC-135W operating at altitude could be combined with known J-15 performance parameters to characterize. The characterization of the Shandong's actual sortie generation rate, not the claimed rate, not the theoretical rate, but the observed rate under operational conditions is an intelligence product that does not appear in any public source. It appeared in the E-2D's mission summary. It will appear in Pacific Fleet's Carrier Capability Assessment. It will inform the modeling that war planners use when they calculate what the Shandong's air wing can generate in the first hours of a conflict. This is operationally important information. The Shandong provided it by operating 63 miles from the Reagan while the E-2D was watching. The RC-135W rivet joint, operating at altitude with its signals intelligence package fully configured, was characterizing the Shandong's entire electromagnetic signature throughout the morning. The Chinese carrier's air traffic control radar, its surface search radar, the communications between the flight deck and the aircraft in the pattern, the coordination between the Shandong and its escorting destroyers, all of it radiating, all of it in a frequency environment that the RC-135W was designed specifically to exploit. Carrier aviation requires radio communication. You cannot conduct a recovery cycle without talking to the aircraft in the pattern. The communications between the Shandong's approach controller and the J-15 pilots during recovery, call signs, approach geometry, fuel state updates, deck status reports, are in the RC-135W's collection record. The communications were encrypted. The metadata is not encrypted. How many aircraft are in the pattern at any given time? The timing of the recovery cycle. The communication tempo during abnormal situations breeds. These are observable from the traffic pattern even without decrypting the content. One abnormal situation occurred. At a point approximately midway through the Shandong's morning flight operations, an aircraft in the recovery pattern made an approach that the deck controller assessed as not within parameters and waved off. This is a normal event in carrier aviation. Wave-offs happen, pilots go around and re-enter the pattern, no harm results. What makes this particular wave-off interesting for intelligence purposes is not the wave-off itself, but the communications traffic that followed it. The RC-135W's collection showed an increase in communications between the Shandong and one of its escorting destroyers immediately following the wave-off. A tempo and pattern consistent with an emergency coordination exchange rather than routine intervessel communication. The wave-off appeared, from the communication pattern, to have involved something beyond a routine approach parameter deviation. The aircraft eventually recovered safely. The additional communications traffic was logged. The logged traffic is a behavioral signature. It characterizes how the Shandong's command structure communicates during an aviation incident, who talks to whom, in what sequence, at what tempo, over which links. This is the organizational response profile of the Chinese carrier strike group under operational stress. It does not appear in any public document about planned carrier operations. It is in the RC-135W's collection record, which went to the appropriate intelligence recipients before the Shandong had completed its recovery cycle. Now let us discuss the specific intelligence value of observing a peer competitor's carrier operations at close range, because this is where the morning's significance becomes strategic rather than tactical. The plan's carrier aviation program is one of the most closely watched military developments in the current intelligence environment. Every deployment, every exercise, every open water operation generates data that updates the models U.S. and Allied planners use to assess what the plan's carrier force will be capable of at specific future dates. The models drive planning. Planning drives capability investment decisions. Capability investment decisions are, at the scale of a national defense budget, multi-billion-dollar choices. Accurate models require accurate data. The most accurate data comes from direct observation of actual operations under real conditions. A carrier group conducting flight operations 63 miles from the E-2D that has been tasked specifically to observe it is providing involuntarily and comprehensively the kind of direct observational data that intelligence analysts spend significant effort trying to obtain. The sortie generation rate, the recovery cycle timing, the catapult versus ski jump performance differential under real operational conditions, not theoretical models, the communications architecture under normal operations and under the stress of an aviation incident, the command response profile during the wave-off, the escort formation's radar emissions throughout the morning, the coordination patterns between the carrier and its screening ships across several hours of continuous observation, all of it, for the duration of the morning, from 63 miles away, without the Shandong being able to prevent the collection or even fully know its scope. The Reagan strike group spent the morning being observed by the Shandong sensors and observing the Shandong with assets whose capabilities the plan's planners do not fully know. This asymmetry, both sides watching, but one side knowing significantly more about what the other's sensors can see and what they are collecting, is the recurring theme in these encounters. The plan's planners know the E-2D is there. They know the RC-135W is there. What they do not know with the same precision is the collection fidelity, the frequency coverage, the resolution at range, and the analysis infrastructure that converts raw collection into the operational products that reach Pacific Fleet Command before the Shandong has secured its flight deck. The intelligence products reach Pacific Fleet Command before the Shandong had secured its flight deck for the midday cycle. The analysts who received the sortie generation rate comparison and the wave-off communications profile had what they needed to update the models before the end of the working day. On the Reagan's flight deck, flight operations continued through the morning at the tempo that decades of practice produce. The catapult crews ran their cycles. The aircraft handlers moved their machines with the choreographic efficiency of a team that does this every day and has the patterns in their hands rather than their heads. The arresting gear crews reset between recoveries with the speed of people who have been doing this long enough that the reset sequence is muscle memory. The deck crew works in a noise environment that makes conversation impossible. Jet engines at close range catapult steam, arresting wire resets, and communicates through hand signals, headset, and the spatial awareness that develops in people who spend months working in the most operationally complex workplace afloat. A plane captain doing pre-launch checks on an FA-18 at the number 2 catapult position looked up at one point and could see, at the edge of visible range, what appeared to be another carrier's island structure on the horizon. He looked at it for a moment, the geometry of it. Large, distinct, unmistakably a carrier's superstructure, and then went back to his checklist. There were 6 items remaining before the aircraft was ready for launch. The carrier on the horizon was someone else's problem, the checklist was his. This is what operational professionalism looks like at the deck level. The strategic significance of 2 carrier groups in the same sea was being processed at the appropriate levels of the command chain. The plane captain's job was 6 checklist items. He did 6 checklist items. The aircraft launched. The catapult cycle ran on time. The checklist was correct. The carrier on the horizon was being handled. Now the economics of this morning, because the economics contain a specific irony. The Shandong strike group represents a substantial investment. The carrier itself, the air wing, the escort vessels, the supply ship, the crew training program, the shore infrastructure. This is a program that has consumed a significant portion of China's defense budget for over a decade. Deploying it to the Philippine Sea, 63 miles from the Reagan, is an expensive way to make a presence argument. The plan's operational cost for a Shandong strike group deployment, fuel, crew time, maintenance tempo, the logistics chain that sustains the formation at sea, is a meaningful number per day at sea. The Reagan strike group was conducting its planned flight operations regardless of whether the Shandong was 63 miles away or 600 miles away. The E-2D was airborne on its standard tasking. The RC-135W was operating on its standard schedule. The collection effort directed at the Shandong's operations was the natural output of sensors that were going to be running anyway, directed at a target that had positioned itself within range and held that position for a morning. The plan spent its carrier group's operational tempo to generate a presence signal. The U.S. Navy collected a comprehensive operational profile of the planned carrier group's current capability state as a byproduct of its own routine operations, the sortie generation rate comparison, the wave-off communications pattern, the escort formation's radar emissions, the command response profile under operational stress, all of it. Over the course of a morning, from an E-2D and an RC-135W that were already there. The ratio of cost to collection yield, from the U.S. perspective, is extremely favorable. By afternoon, Chinese state media had the version. The planned carrier Shandong had quote 1 demonstrating the combat readiness of the carrier strike group, and the quote 2 the footage showed J-15S launching from the Shandong's ski jump ramp. Genuinely impressive imagery, a large fighter aircraft accelerating up the ramp and becoming airborne with the visual authority that carrier aviation always carries regardless of which country's deck is involved. The broadcast did not mention the wave-off. It did not mention the communications traffic that followed it. It did not mention the E-2D that had the Shandong's flight deck on radar track from the first launch. It did not mention the RC-135W's collection record or what the sortie generation rate comparison between the 2 carriers revealed about the current planned USN capability gap in carrier aviation. It did not mention the plane captain who looked up from his checklist, saw the Shandong on the horizon, and went back to 6 remaining items. State media is produced from available material. The available material was impressive footage and a confident narrative. The unavailable material was in the E-2D's mission summary, the RC-135W's collection record, and the Pacific Fleet Carrier Capability Assessment that will be updated before the end of the week with observations from this specific morning's operations. The Philippine Sea is large. 2 carriers operated in it simultaneously for a morning. One side knows significantly more about the other's operations as a result. The updated capability assessment for the Shandong's air wing, current sortie generation rate, observed combat radius limitations, command response latency under stress, is in the archive. The models that war planners use when they calculate what the Shandong can do in the first hours of a conflict are more accurate tonight than they were yesterday morning. The plane captain finished his checklist. The aircraft launched. The catapult cycle ran on time. 63 miles to the northwest, the Shandong continued its operations. The E-2D continued watching. The notes were good. Bye for now.